First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm on Yuin country, a beautiful part of southeast New South Wales, where I'm privileged to live and work. I'm grateful for the enduring knowledge embedded in country and to the Aboriginal custodians, elders and knowledge holders here. Well, what a year we've had so far. So many changes and disruptions to just about every aspect of our lives. And while some of these have certainly been a struggle, and without downplaying the impact of this pandemic, I found that the experience has challenged me in a good way and helped me appreciate some of the things that I've often taken for granted. And I know I'm not alone in this if Twitter or Facebook are anything to go by. So some things which may have caught my passing attention before have now captured my imagination. So I'd like you to take you to one of my favourite places where I've found myself much more often than usual, in a place where I can walk and slow down a bit to think and reflect on lots of things. So let's imagine that now, here we are at my local beach, about 15-20 minutes away. And here's one of the many photos I've taken. I'll call it footprints in the sand. So under normal circumstances, I might think of footprints as interesting, but really quite unremarkable. But what started to capture my imagination was when I started to think about the people who made them. Let's just indulge in this idea a little bit. So when we look at the footprints, it's pretty easy to make some educated guesses. So we can see by the footprints which way they were heading. We can see how big or small their feet were. We can know if they were barefoot or wearing shoes. Even by the length of their stride, we could guess their height. Or if you happen to walk in each step, you could see how your stride matches to theirs. I won't go on because I think you get the picture. But this is what got me thinking. There's quite a lot of information in those prints. When I reflected a bit more, I started to think the footprints are perhaps a little bit like statistics. And by this I mean that there's only so much we can know from the footprints themselves. But there's so much that we cannot know. So some of the things footprints can't tell us are where were these people from, or how long they stayed, who they were with, how they were feeling, did they love it or not? Would they ever come back? So it struck me that for all the evidence in front of me, I knew barely anything about the others who'd been there too. So in a similar way, for my fellowship, which focuses on the issue of regional student attrition, the stats were not going to tell me enough on their own. I could certainly get the big picture issues. So for example, did you know that regional enrolments have increased by 50%? But that only 23% of regional people have a degree? This compares to almost 45% of people in major cities. So you can see that these stats are really important to know. And like footprints, they can be fascinating, but they just don't go deep enough to really understand why is this so. But before you can start to offer any solutions, you need to find out what it is that gets in the way. And the best way I could do this, to fill in some of the detail, was to go to regional students themselves to find out from them about their experiences of being at university. And that's my project in a nutshell. Now I'm going to take you through some of the things that I've found so far. This is based on surveys and interviews with 80 regional students. These students were studying across 13 different universities or campuses. Most of them were over 21, but more than half of them were older than 30. Most were female, and many were studying full-time. And just over half were doing their degrees online. But at the time I collected this data, many more were adjusting to online because of COVID. So this gives some useful information about their student selves, but actually I want to know more. And this is where equity-related factors and other life responsibilities add more depth. And this is also where it starts to get really interesting. So students could select any combination of categories that were reflective of their own circumstances. Here, the choices are set out quite clearly. So at a glance, we can see that many come from working class backgrounds, first in their family or mature age. They also had many responsibilities on top of their study. But what's significant here is that most students selected more than one category. So we're starting to build up a better picture, but to me, this is still a bit footprinty. When you belong to multiple equity factors, it can feel like you're on an unequal playing field. So now I'm going to show you how I visualized equity factors in a way that alludes to this. This chord diagram shows an element of messiness, where the ribbons intersect, and the thickness of each ribbon makes the weighted relationships across and between the equity factors much more visible. To me, this gives a better sense of the complexity of being regional, as well as belonging to multiple equity factors. And it also allows us to imagine the compounding effect that intersecting equity factors may have over time. When I was going through the data, one of the surprising things for me was that almost all of the students stayed in their regional area. The benefits of staying regional were often talked about in relational terms, like the sense of community, the strong support networks, the willingness to help each other out, and that everyone knows everyone else, although sometimes this was not considered such a positive. What was less surprising was that once they have their degree, many students intend to give back to the regional communities that have given them so much. Let's turn our attention now to what students have said. So choosing to stay often meant choosing to study online. So while the flexibility aspects of online are a bonus, poor internet connection can be really frustrating and time-consuming. Only a regional person would understand that sometimes you have to sit up on a hill to get better internet. Here's what one of the students reflected. She is mature age. She's studying her accounting degree online and is doing this part-time. As well as that, she has school-age children. She works part-time and has community responsibilities. She says that you've got to understand that everything takes longer, that there's no instantaneous in the country, that even the simplest thing, like having the video on, can mean the difference of being able to attend or not. Staying can also mean having to travel long distances with no public transport options. So this is another reality that regional people are often resigned to. But a 7-hour round trip for a tutorial each week, when you work full-time and have 3 school-age children, makes life even more complex. Or when your mandatory placement is 9 hours from home and you have no family close by to look after your children. On top of that, you have to bear all the costs of travel, accommodation, as well as take recreational leave from work. These are big asks. Even so, the advice these students would give to other regional people thinking about uni is to definitely go for it. But there are also a range of emotions that go hand in hand with the experience. And this is what some of them said. It's like a roller coaster with moments of pride and elation and that special feeling of, wow, I've got this, mixed with high levels of stress. Or that it's difficult to juggle all the responsibilities without family support, especially as a single mum. Sometimes it feels lonely being an online student. Or finally this one, I wouldn't change it for the world. I've loved every moment, although it's been positive, but challenging. So why do we need to listen to regional students? Because we need to know more than what footprints in the sand can tell us. And unless we ask, we cannot actually know what the realities are for regional students. So regional people are often noted for their resilience and determination and for being highly motivated, but they can also be juggling many other things that can be compounding and can interfere with achieving their educational goals. So as universities, the best thing we can do is shut up and listen so that we can respond to what regional people themselves are telling us. Because when you think about it, putting our time and resources into developing support that's based on knowing barely anything about students' lived realities benefits no one. If we can simply shut up to listen and, of course, take heed, this will provide a more deliberate move towards making higher education more equitable than it currently is for regional students. Thank you for listening.